Hello everyone, and welcome back to Snowbound Screams. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades. And what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts. Each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The deep woods of America hold secrets older than our nation itself. These forests have witnessed countless events, both natural and unexplained. They stand as silent sentinels to our past, guardians of mysteries that defy rational explanation. When we venture into these ancient spaces, we step outside the boundaries of civilization and into a realm where different rules apply. What you are about to hear are not campfire tales meant to frighten. They are documented encounters that have left investigators, witnesses, and sometimes entire communities searching for answers that may never come. These stories share common threads: the profound isolation of the wilderness, the thin veil between our reality and something other, and the lingering questions that haunt those who survive their encounters. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late September of 2015 when Park Ranger Daniel Mitchell began his final patrol in the Quinault Rainforest of Olympic National Park. At 42 years old, with nearly 2 decades of service under his belt, Daniel knew these temperate rainforests better than most people know their own neighborhoods. The ancient Douglas firs and western red cedars created a canopy so dense that sunlight struggled to penetrate, casting the forest floor in perpetual twilight even during daylight hours. The air hung heavy with moisture, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and rich earth, while the constant dripping of condensation from countless leaves created a natural percussion that had become the soundtrack to Daniel's career. To report his planned route through the eastern section of the park, an area he was scheduled to survey for potential storm damage following an unusually wet summer. The transmission was clear, his voice steady as it always was, betraying none of the physical challenges of navigating the rugged terrain. According to the log maintained at park headquarters, Daniel was equipped with standard issue gear: a GPS tracker, satellite phone, emergency beacon, and enough supplies for 3 days in the wilderness. His last known coordinates placed him approximately 7 miles from the nearest trailhead, in an area characterized by steep ravines and dense undergrowth that made progress slow and deliberate. When Daniel's scheduled check-in failed to materialize, protocol dictated that rangers maintain radio contact every 4 hours during remote patrols, and Daniel had never once missed a check-in during his entire career. Dispatch attempted to raise him on all channels, but only static answered their calls. When Daniel still hadn't made contact, a full search protocol was initiated. 2 additional rangers were dispatched to follow his planned route, while a helicopter was prepared for aerial reconnaissance as soon as weather permitted. What the search teams discovered deep in the forest would become one of the most perplexing cases in National Park Service history. Approximately 3 miles into Daniel's planned route, searchers found his GPS tracker lying on the forest floor, its screen cracked but still functioning. The device had been deliberately placed atop a bed of moss, as if set down with care rather than dropped accidentally. Nearby, a series of tracks led away from the trail, not human footprints, but something else entirely. The impressions were approximately 14 inches long, with a width of 7 inches, showing a pattern of movement that defied identification by experienced trackers. Most disturbingly, the tracks seemed to begin where Daniel's ended, as if he had been walking and then suddenly continued in a different form. The search expanded over the following days, eventually involving more than 50 personnel from multiple agencies. By the 5th day, when rain began to fall in earnest, threatening to wash away any remaining evidence, the official search was scaled back. Daniel Mitchell was officially listed as missing, presumed dead, though his body was never recovered. The case file, designated NPS OLY 2015-047, remains open to this day, with periodic reviews conducted by Park Service officials who continue to hope for new information. In the aftermath of Daniel's disappearance, several rangers who participated in the search came forward with unsettling accounts of their own experiences in that section of the park. One ranger reported hearing what sounded like human speech in a language he couldn't identify, emanating from deep within the forest during the search. Another described finding trees with unusual marking spirals carved into the bark approximately 8 feet above ground level, too high for any human to have reached without assistance. These details were noted in supplementary reports, but never incorporated into the official investigation, which maintained that Daniel had likely become disoriented in the unfamiliar terrain and succumbed to exposure. 5 years after his disappearance, Daniel's GPS tracker was re-examined using technology not available at the time of the initial investigation. The enhanced analysis revealed something that had been missed, a single voice recording captured by the device's microphone, made approximately 30 minutes before the tracker was found. The recording lasts only 11 seconds and contains what acoustic experts have identified as Daniel's voice, speaking in a calm, measured tone. What he says has never been fully deciphered, though linguists who have studied the recording agree that it is not any known language. Daniel Mitchell's case joins dozens of similar disappearances in national parks across the country, cases documented by researchers who note the peculiar patterns that connect them. Experienced outdoors people vanishing without a trace, sometimes in perfect weather conditions, strange audio phenomena reported by search teams, and the discovery of personal items removed from their owners and placed in deliberate arrangements. These similarities suggest that what happened to Daniel Mitchell was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern that defies conventional explanation. The Quinault Salt Rainforest continues its ancient cycles of growth and decay, indifferent to the mysteries it holds. Visitors still hike those trails, unaware that they walk through a place where the boundary between our world and something else may have grown thin enough for someone to pass through entirely. Daniel Mitchell's name appears on a memorial plaque at park headquarters, one of several names that represent the unanswered questions that linger in America's wilderness spaces. No trace of him was ever found beyond that GPS tracker and those inexplicable tracks leading deeper into the forest. It was mid-August of 2018 when the Henderson family, Mark, Sarah, and their 12-year-old daughter Emma arrived at Whispering Pines Campground in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. They had planned this week-long camping trip for months, looking forward to disconnecting from their busy lives in suburban New Jersey and immersing themselves in nature. The campground, situated on the shore of a small lake surrounded by dense pine forest, was nearly empty that week, with only 3 other sites occupied. This isolation was precisely what the Hendersons had sought a chance to experience the wilderness without the crowds that typically populated popular camping areas during summer months. The first 2 days of their trip passed uneventfully, marked by swimming in the cool lake water, hiking the well-maintained trails, and evenings spent around their campfire, making s'mores and telling stories. Mark, an amateur photographer, took numerous pictures of the surrounding landscape, capturing the way sunlight filtered through the pine canopy and created shifting patterns on the forest floor. Sarah, a middle school science teacher, pointed out various plants and animals to Emma, turning their vacation into an educational experience. Everything about their trip seemed perfectly normal, a typical family vacation in the mountains that would become a cherished memory in years to come. When Emma woke her parents, complaining that she had heard someone whispering her name outside their tent, Mark and Sarah attributed this to their daughter's imagination, perhaps influenced by the scary stories they had been telling around the campfire earlier that evening. They checked outside with a flashlight, but found nothing unusual, and Emma soon returned to sleep. The following morning, however, Mark discovered something strange, a series of small stones arranged in a perfect circle around their tent, each stone approximately the size of a golf ball and placed with deliberate precision. Neither Mark nor Sarah had noticed these stones when they went to bed the previous night. That day, as they hiked a trail that led deeper into the forest, they encountered an elderly man who introduced himself as Walt Peterson, a seasonal ranger who had worked in the Adirondacks for nearly 40 years. When Mark mentioned the strange arrangement of stones around their tent, Walt's demeanor shifted noticeably. He advised them to pack up and leave the campground that day, explaining that Whispering Pines had a history of unusual occurrences that weren't documented in any official park literature. According to Walt, several families had reported similar experiences over the years: whispers in the night, strange arrangements of natural objects, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched by something just beyond the tree line. Most concerning, Walt mentioned that some of these reports came from the same area of the campground where the Hendersons had set up their tent. Despite Walt's warning, the Hendersons decided to stay, attributing his concerns to local folklore or perhaps an overactive imagination. That evening, as they prepared dinner, Mark noticed that the forest had grown unusually quiet. The constant chorus of crickets and tree frogs that had provided background music to their previous nights was absent, creating an unsettling silence that seemed to amplify every small sound they made. Sarah later described the atmosphere as oppressive, as if the air itself had grown heavier. Emma became increasingly withdrawn, refusing to leave the immediate vicinity of their campsite and repeatedly asking to go home. That night, as the family sat around their campfire, they heard what sounded like footsteps approaching from the dense woods beyond their sight. Mark grabbed a flashlight and called out, assuming it might be another camper or perhaps a park ranger. The footsteps stopped when he spoke, then resumed after a moment, now circling their campsite just beyond the reach of the firelight. What made this particularly unsettling was the sound, not the heavy tread of a human, but a lighter, almost deliberate stepping that seemed to come from something moving on two legs, but with a different gait than any person they had ever heard. After approximately 10 minutes of this circling behavior, the footsteps stopped directly behind Emma's chair. Mark stood and shone his flashlight in that direction, but the beam revealed only trees and undergrowth. At that moment, Emma let out a scream, pointing toward the darkness. Both parents turned to see what appeared to be a tall, thin figure standing just beyond the trees, too tall to be human. With proportions that seemed wrong in the firelight, the figure remained visible for only a moment before stepping back into the shadows and disappearing. The Hendersons wasted no time gathering their essential belongings, leaving behind their tent and most of their camping equipment as they fled to their car and drove away without looking back. The following morning, Mark contacted the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to report their experience and inquire about retrieving their abandoned equipment. The ranger who took his call listened patiently, but seemed unsurprised by their account, explaining that while official records contained no documentation of unusual occurrences at Whispering Pines, he had heard similar stories from other visitors over the years. When Mark and Sarah returned with the ranger to collect their belongings, they found their tent collapsed and their remaining equipment scattered throughout the site. Most disturbingly, Sarah's journal, which she had left on the small table inside their tent, was open to a blank page, on which something had drawn a series of spiraling symbols similar to those Mark had seen carved into trees during their hike. The Hendersons never returned to Whispering Pines, and they rarely speak of their experience except to acknowledge that something happened that they cannot explain. Mark later had the photographs from their trip analyzed by a forensic imaging specialist, who confirmed that several images contained what appeared to be tall, thin figures, partially obscured by trees in the background of otherwise normal landscape shots. These figures had not been visible when Mark took the photographs or when he initially reviewed them on his camera. The specialist could offer no explanation for these anomalies, suggesting only that they might be artifacts of the digital imaging process. Though he privately acknowledged that this seemed unlikely, given their consistent appearance across multiple images. Whispering Pines Campground remains open to this day, with no official mention of the strange occurrences reported by the Hendersons and other visitors over the years. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation maintains no public records of unusual phenomena in the area. Though privately, some rangers acknowledge that certain sections of the Adirondacks seem to be sites of recurring, unexplained events. The Hendersons' experience, like so many others, exists in that gray area between documented fact and folklore. A reminder that even in our modern, scientifically advanced world, there are places where the rational explanations we rely on may not apply. The forest keeps its secrets, and those who encounter them are often left with more questions than answers. It was early October of 2016 when college student Jessica Martin began what she intended to be a day hike along the Appalachian Trail in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. At 22 years old, Jessica was an experienced hiker who had completed numerous trails in the southeastern United States. She was studying environmental science at the University of Tennessee and had a particular interest in the ecology of the Appalachian region. That morning, she had left her car at the Newfound Gap parking area, planning to hike approximately 8 miles to Charlie's Bunyan before returning by the same route. According to the entry in her hiking journal, which was later recovered by search teams, the weather was perfect clear skies, mild temperatures, and excellent visibility. When she sent a text message to her roommate showing a panoramic view from one of the overlooks along the trail, the message read, "Absolutely breathtaking up here. The fall colors are starting to show." This side trail was not part of her original plan, but was a popular detour that added approximately 2 miles to the hike. It was the last direct communication anyone would receive from Jessica, though her phone would continue to ping nearby cell towers for several hours, providing a general location for search teams. When Jessica's roommate reported her overdue and unresponsive to phone calls, the National Park Service, working in conjunction with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, initiated a full-scale search operation that would eventually expand to include more than 100 personnel, search dogs, helicopters, and volunteers from multiple states. The challenging terrain of the Smokies, with its steep elevation changes and dense vegetation, complicated the search efforts, as did the fact that Jessica had deviated from her planned route. The first 3 days of the search yielded no results, though teams did find her car exactly where she had left it, confirming that she had indeed begun her hike as planned. On the 4th day of the search, a breakthrough came when a team discovered Jessica's backpack hanging from a tree branch approximately 50 yards off the main trail. Her water bottle, food, and first aid kit were all present and accounted for, as was her cell phone, which had been powered down. The only items missing were her hiking journal and a small digital camera she always carried. Most disturbingly, searchers noted that the backpack had been hung at approximately eye level, as if placed there specifically to be found. A search of the immediate area revealed no footprints, no signs of struggle, and no indication of where Jessica might have gone. The discovery of the backpack marked a turning point in the investigation, shifting the focus from a typical lost hiker scenario to something more sinister. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation took over the case, treating it as a potential criminal matter, despite the absence of any evidence of foul play. Special Agent Rebecca Collins, who led the investigation, later noted in her report that the deliberate arrangement of Jessica's belongings suggested intelligent agency. rather than random chance or animal activity. The backpack was sent to the state crime lab for analysis, though forensic examination yielded no DNA or fingerprints other than Jessica's own. 2 weeks into the search, as conventional methods failed to produce additional leads, the investigation took an unusual turn. Jessica's parents, desperate for any information about their daughter, consulted a psychic medium who claimed to have received messages from Jessica. While law enforcement typically dismisses such approaches, the medium provided a surprisingly accurate description of the area where the backpack had been found, including details that had not been released to the public. More intriguingly, the medium claimed that Jessica had been drawn off the trail by what she described as whispering voices, and had encountered tall, silent figures who seemed to be observing her from the trees. The medium also mentioned that Jessica had left her journal deliberately at a specific location, wanting it to be found. Acting on this information, search teams returned to the area where the backpack had been discovered, expanding their search radius to include a small cave formation approximately half a mile away. Inside this cave, they found Jessica's hiking journal, open to a page containing the final entry. The entry, written in Jessica's handwriting, but with a quality that her parents later described as unusually neat, read, "They've been watching me since I left the main trail. Not people, something else. They don't speak with words, but with thoughts directly in my head. They want me to come with them, to see what lies beyond the mountain. I'm not afraid anymore. I understand now that there are places where the veil between worlds grows thin, and this is one of those places." The discovery of this journal entry deepened the mystery surrounding Jessica's disappearance. The language and concepts expressed seemed inconsistent with her scientific background and rational personality. Handwriting experts confirmed that the entry was indeed written by Jessica, though they noted an unusual uniformity in the pen strokes, as if written with extreme deliberation. The journal contained no other references to these figures or to any unusual experiences, making the final entry all the more perplexing. A thorough search of the cave and surrounding area revealed no other clues, no footprints, and no indication of where Jessica might have gone after leaving the journal. As the official search entered its 3rd week with no additional discoveries, resources began to be scaled back. The National Park Service continued periodic searches of the area, but the case gradually shifted from an active rescue operation to a missing person investigation. Jessica's parents established a foundation in her name to provide support for families of other missing persons in national parks, hoping that something positive might come from their tragedy. They also commissioned a private investigation, which continued for 2 years, but yielded no additional information beyond what had already been discovered. 5 years after her disappearance, Jessica Martin's case remains one of the most baffling in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Officially, she is listed as missing, presumed dead, though no body has ever been recovered. The circumstances of her disappearance defy conventional explanation, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. Her case joins hundreds of similar disappearances in national parks across the country, cases that share common elements: experienced outdoors, people vanishing without a trace, strange arrangements of personal belongings, and reports of unusual phenomena in the areas where they disappeared. The Great Smoky Mountains continue their ancient cycles, drawing millions of visitors each year who remain largely unaware of the mysteries they contain. Jessica's story has become part of the modern folklore of the region, a cautionary tale told around campfires and in online forums dedicated to unexplained phenomena. Whether she became disoriented and succumbed to the elements, encountered foul play, or experienced something beyond our current understanding of reality, remains unknown. What is certain is that something happened to Jessica Martin on that October day in 2016. Something that defies rational explanation and continues to haunt those who search for answers in the vast wilderness of the Smoky Mountains. It was late June of 2017 when four friends, Michael Chen, Sarah Thompson, David Rodriguez, and Emily Watson, set out on a week-long backpacking trip in the remote wilderness of Sierra Nevada. All four were experienced hikers in their late 20s, well equipped for the challenges of high-altitude trekking. Their planned route would take them through some of the most pristine and isolated areas of the range, far from established trails and campgrounds. According to the detailed itinerary Michael had left with his sister, they planned to reach their highest point on day 3 of their journey, after which they would begin their descent toward civilization. On their second day, when Michael called to report that they were making good progress and had found a beautiful spot to camp near a small alpine lake. The first indication that something was wrong came when the group failed to make their scheduled call on day 4. When Michael's sister couldn't reach them via satellite phone, she initially assumed they had simply moved to an area with poor reception. However, when a second scheduled call on day 5 also went unanswered, she became concerned and contacted the Inyo County Sheriff's Department, which has jurisdiction over the area where the group was hiking. A search was initiated the following morning, though challenging terrain and unpredictable weather would complicate efforts for days to come. 3 days into the search, as concern for the missing hikers grew, a breakthrough came in an unexpected form. A ranger conducting aerial reconnaissance spotted something unusual near the alpine lake, where the group had planned to camp on their third night, a perfectly circular clearing, approximately 50 feet in diameter, where no vegetation grew. This clearing was not visible on any maps of the area and did not appear to be natural in origin. When a ground team reached the location 2 days later, delayed by sudden storms that made helicopter travel impossible, they discovered something even more perplexing, an abandoned campsite at the center of the clearing. The campsite contained 2 tents, both of which had been cut open from the outside, not the inside as would be expected if the occupants had tried to escape from something inside. Personal belongings were scattered throughout the site, but there was no sign of blood, no indication of a struggle, and no footprints other than those left by the search team. Most disturbingly, all 4 backpacks were present, each one opened and its contents arranged in deliberate patterns around the campsite. Food items were left untouched, and all electronic devices, including the satellite phone, had been powered down and placed in a neat row near the center of the clearing. The search expanded to include additional personnel from multiple agencies, as well as volunteers with experience in high-altitude rescue operations. Over the next week, teams systematically searched the surrounding area, expanding outward in concentric circles from the strange clearing. They found no bodies, no additional signs of the missing hikers, and no explanation for the unusual nature of the campsite. The only discovery of note came on the 6th day of the expanded search, when a team found Michael's hiking journal approximately half a mile from the campsite, tucked into the hollow of a tree, as if deliberately placed there to be found. The final entry in Michael's journal, dated the night before the group's last satellite call, described their arrival at the alpine lake and their decision to camp in the clearing. He also mentioned that all 4 of them had experienced a strange sensation upon entering the clearing, a feeling of being watched by something just beyond their field of vision. The discovery of the journal raised more questions than it answered. Why had the group apparently decided to stay in the clearing despite their unease? What had caused them to abandon their campsite in such an unusual manner? And perhaps most perplexingly, where had they gone without taking any of their essential supplies? The lack of footprints or other signs of passage suggested that they might have been removed from the area by some means other than walking, though what that might be remained a matter of speculation. As the official search entered its 3rd week with no additional discoveries, resources began to be scaled back. The families of the missing hikers maintained hope, offering a substantial reward for information that might lead to their recovery. Private investigators were hired, and additional searches were conducted using specialized equipment, including ground-penetrating radar to search for buried remains and thermal imaging cameras to detect any signs of human presence. None of these efforts yielded results, and the case gradually transitioned from an active rescue operation to a missing person investigation. 2 months after the group's disappearance, a wildlife biologist conducting research in the area made a disturbing discovery. Approximately 3 miles from the abandoned campsite, he found a series of unusual tracks in a remote meadow. The tracks were not made by any known animal, and they appeared suddenly in the middle of the meadow with no indication of where they had come from. Each track was approximately 16 inches long and showed a pattern of movement that suggested something walking on 2 legs, but with a stride length far exceeding that of a human. The tracks continued for approximately 100 yards before disappearing as mysteriously as they had appeared, with no indication of where whatever made them had gone. The biologist reported his discovery to the Inyo County Sheriff's Department, which sent a team to investigate. The tracks were photographed and cast, but analysis by wildlife experts yielded no definitive identification. Some suggested they might be the work of pranksters, though the remote location and unusual characteristics of the tracks made this explanation seem unlikely. Others speculated about unknown species, though no such tracks had been reported in the area before or since. The tracks remain an unexplained element in an already baffling case. 4 years after their disappearance, the fate of Michael Chen, Sarah Thompson, David Rodriguez, and Emily Watson remains unknown. Officially, they are listed as missing, presumed dead, though no bodies have ever been recovered. The strange clearing where they camped has been examined by multiple experts, including geologists, who cannot explain its origin or the reason for the lack of vegetation within it. The case has become part of the modern folklore of the Sierra Nevada, a cautionary tale told among hikers and outdoor enthusiasts who venture into the remote wilderness areas of the range. What happened to those 4 experienced hikers in the summer of 2017 continues to defy conventional explanation. Whether they encountered foul play, experienced some kind of shared delusion brought on by high altitude, or stumbled upon something beyond our current understanding of reality, remains a matter of speculation. Their story joins countless others of people who have vanished in America's wilderness areas, leaving behind only questions and mysteries that may never be solved. The Sierra Nevada continues its ancient cycles, indifferent to the human dramas that play out within its vast expanse, keeping its secrets as it has for millions of years. It was early November of 2019 when forestry worker Thomas Campbell began his routine survey of timber stands in the remote North Maine woods. At 38 years old, Thomas had spent most of his adult life working in these forests, first as a logger and later as a forestry technician for a private land management company. His job required him to spend weeks at a time in isolated areas, assessing the health and growth of timber stands and identifying areas for selective harvesting. That particular week, he was working in a section of forest approximately 20 miles from the nearest paved road, an area characterized by dense stands of spruce and fir, interspersed with wetlands and small lakes. Thomas's work followed a predictable pattern. Each morning, he would radio his base camp to report his planned activities for the day, then head out on foot with his equipment, which included a GPS unit, a 2-way radio, and various tools for measuring and recording data about the trees. He was an experienced outdoorsman, comfortable with the isolation of his work, and knowledgeable about the challenges of the Maine wilderness, including changing weather conditions and the presence of wildlife such as moose, black bears, and coyotes. His colleagues described him as methodical and reliable, someone who followed procedures precisely and never took unnecessary risks. to report that he had discovered something strange in a remote clearing approximately 3 miles from his current position, according to the radio log maintained at base camp. Thomas's voice sounded uncharacteristically hesitant as he described finding a series of tree stumps that appeared to have been cut by something other than human equipment. The cuts, he explained, were unusually clean and precise, with no signs of the tearing or splintering typically associated with chainsaws or other conventional cutting tools. He also mentioned that the stumps were arranged in a geometric pattern that seemed deliberate rather than random. The following morning, Thomas set out to investigate the clearing more thoroughly, planning to take photographs and detailed measurements of the unusual stumps. To confirm that he had reached the location and was beginning his documentation. This was the last communication anyone would have with Thomas Campbell. When he failed to report back at the end of his workday and his radio calls went unanswered, Base Camp initiated a search protocol, dispatching 2 other forestry workers to follow his planned route. The search team found Thomas's truck approximately 2 miles from the clearing where he had intended to work. The vehicle was parked off the narrow logging road, its doors unlocked and the keys still in the ignition. Thomas's GPS unit and radio were on the passenger seat, both powered down. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication of foul play, and no footprints or other tracks leading away from the truck. The search team followed the direction Thomas would have walked to reach the clearing, calling his name periodically, but received no response. When they reached the clearing that Thomas had described in his radio call, they discovered something even more perplexing than what he had initially reported. The clearing was approximately 100 feet in diameter, perfectly circular in shape, and contained not just tree stumps, but also a series of deep holes arranged in a spiral pattern. The stumps showed the same unusual cutting characteristics that Thomas had described: perfectly smooth surfaces with no signs of tool marks or splintering. The holes, each approximately 3 feet in diameter and of varying depths, appeared to have been excavated with precision that defied conventional equipment. Most disturbingly, searchers found Thomas's notebook lying in the center of the clearing, open to a page containing a detailed sketch of the spiral pattern of holes, along with measurements and notations in his handwriting. The final entry on the page read simply, "They're here, watching from the trees, not human. The cutting, it's a message." There was no indication of where Thomas might have gone after leaving this note, and no tracks leading away from the clearing in any direction. An extensive search was launched the following morning, involving personnel from the Maine Forest Service, the Maine Warden Service, and volunteers from surrounding communities. Search dogs were brought in, but they seemed unusually agitated in the area around the clearing and were unable to establish a scent trail for Thomas. Helicopters conducted aerial searches of the surrounding forest, but the dense canopy made visibility difficult, and no signs of human activity were spotted. The search continued for 10 days, gradually expanding outward from the clearing, but yielding no additional clues to Thomas's whereabouts. As the official search began to scale back, investigators turned their attention to the unusual characteristics of the clearing itself. Forestry experts examined the tree stumps and could offer no explanation for the cutting technique that had been used. The smoothness of the cuts suggested some kind of high-temperature process, perhaps laser cutting, though there was no evidence of burning or charring on the stumps. The holes presented an even greater mystery, as their precision and arrangement suggested a level of planning and execution that would be difficult to achieve even with modern equipment, let alone in a remote area with no signs of machinery or human activity. 3 weeks after Thomas's disappearance, a wildlife biologist conducting research in the area made an unusual discovery. Approximately 5 miles from the mysterious clearing, he found a series of tracks that did not correspond to any known animal species. The tracks showed a pattern of movement that suggested something walking on 2 legs. but with a stride length and weight distribution inconsistent with human or bear tracks. What made these tracks particularly unusual was that they appeared suddenly in the middle of a dense forest area, with no indication of where they had come from, and continued for approximately 200 yards before disappearing just as mysteriously. The biologist reported his discovery to the search team, which conducted a thorough investigation of the area where the tracks had been found. Photographs and casts were made of the tracks, but analysis by wildlife experts yielded no definitive identification. Some suggested they might be the work of pranksters, though the remote location and unusual characteristics of the tracks made this explanation seem unlikely. Others speculated about unknown species, though no such tracks had been reported in the area before or since. The tracks remain an unexplained element in an already baffling case. 6 months after his disappearance, Thomas Campbell's case was officially reclassified from a missing person investigation to a cold case, with no active leads being pursued by law enforcement. His family established a foundation in his name to provide support for families of other missing persons in wilderness areas, hoping that something positive might come from their tragedy. They also commissioned a private investigation, which continued for 2 years but yielded no additional information beyond what had already been discovered. Thomas Campbell's disappearance joins countless others of people who have vanished in America's wilderness areas, leaving behind only questions and mysteries that may never be solved. The North Maine woods continue their ancient cycles, indifferent to the human dramas that play out within their vast expanse, keeping their secrets as they have for thousands of years. What happened to Thomas Campbell in that remote clearing in November of 2019 continues to defy conventional explanation, remaining one of the most perplexing cases in the history of Maine forestry operations. No trace of him was ever found beyond his truck, his notebook, and those inexplicable tracks leading deeper into the forest. It was mid-November of 2020 when veteran hunter James Calloway set out for what he intended to be a week-long hunting trip in the Mark Twain National Forest of the Missouri Ozarks. At 53 years old, James had been hunting these forests for over 3 decades, knowing the terrain, the seasonal patterns of wildlife, and the challenges of the rugged landscape better than most. He was particularly familiar with the remote eastern section of the forest, an area characterized by steep limestone bluffs, dense hardwood forests, and numerous caves and springs. That Monday morning, he had driven his pickup truck as far as the old logging roads would allow, then continued on foot to a small cabin he maintained on private land adjacent to the national forest. James's routine was well established. Each morning he would rise before dawn, prepare a simple breakfast, then head out with his hunting gear, which included a high-powered rifle, a GPS unit, and a 2-way radio for communication with other hunters in the area. He typically hunted alone, preferring the solitude of the forest to the company of others, though he maintained regular contact with his wife, Margaret, via satellite phone each evening. On this particular trip, he had planned to focus on an area known as Devil's Hollow, a remote valley approximately 5 miles from his cabin, where he had previously had success tracking white-tailed deer. The first indication that something was unusual came on Wednesday evening, when James called his wife on the satellite phone. According to Margaret, who later provided a statement to investigators, James seemed distracted and agitated, mentioning that he had been experiencing strange interference on his radio throughout the day. He described hearing what sounded like voices speaking in a language he couldn't identify, mixed with unusual mechanical sounds that didn't correspond to any known equipment. He also mentioned finding a series of unusual tracks near his hunting stand, though he couldn't identify what animal might have made them. Margaret urged him to cut his trip short and return home, but James insisted that he had at least 2 more days of hunting planned before he would consider leaving. The following morning, James made his regular call to base camp to report his planned activities for the day. The radio operator who took his call later noted that James's signal was unusually weak and distorted, with significant static that made communication difficult. James mentioned that he planned to hunt in an area approximately 2 miles east of his previous location, where he had seen signs of deer activity the previous day. This was the last communication anyone would have with James Calloway. When he failed to call his wife that evening, and his radio calls went unanswered, she became concerned and contacted the Missouri Department of Conservation, which initiated a search the following morning. The search team found James's hunting stand exactly where he had indicated it would be, but there was no sign of him. His rifle was leaning against the tree, unloaded and properly maintained, and his pack was hanging from a nearby branch containing all of his essential supplies. The only items missing were his GPS unit and his two-way radio. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, and no indication of what might have happened to him. The search team did discover something unusual. However, a series of tracks that did not correspond to any known animal species. The tracks showed a pattern of movement that suggested something walking on 2 legs, but with a stride length and weight distribution inconsistent with human tracks. As the search expanded to include additional personnel from multiple agencies, more unusual discoveries were made. Approximately half a mile from James's hunting stand, searchers found a series of trees that had been stripped of their bark in unusual patterns. The stripping appeared to have been done with precision, creating geometric designs that seemed deliberate rather than random. Most disturbingly, the bark had been removed from heights up to 12 feet above ground level, far beyond what any human could reach without assistance. Forestry experts who examined the trees could offer no explanation for the unusual markings, noting that they did not correspond to any known animal behavior or human activity. 3 days into the search, a breakthrough came when James's two-way radio was discovered in a small clearing approximately 2 miles from his hunting stand. The radio had been placed deliberately on a flat rock at the center of the clearing. Its antenna extended and the power turned on. When searchers tested the radio, they found that it was functioning normally, though they did experience some interference similar to what James had described in his call to his wife. What made this discovery particularly perplexing was that there were no tracks leading to or from the rock where the radio had been placed, as if it had materialized there rather than being carried by someone. The search continued for another week, gradually expanding outward from the area where James had been hunting, but yielding no additional clues to his whereabouts. The Missouri State Highway Patrol's Division of Drug and Crime Control conducted an investigation, treating the case as a potential criminal matter, despite the absence of evidence of foul play. Special Agent Robert Miller, who led the investigation, later noted in his report that the unusual characteristics of the case, the strange radio interference, the inexplicable tracks, and the unusual tree markings suggested that something beyond conventional explanation might have been involved, though he stopped short of speculating what that might be. 2 weeks after James's disappearance, his wife Margaret made a decision that would provide additional information about his final days. She contacted a private investigator who specialized in missing persons cases, hoping that a fresh perspective might uncover something that law enforcement had missed. The investigator, a former FBI agent named Michael Thompson, arranged to have James's radio examined by an electronics expert who had experience with unusual signal phenomena. The expert discovered something that had been missed during the initial investigation, a recording on the radio's memory that had been made approximately 2 hours before James's last communication with base camp. The recording, which lasted approximately 3 minutes, contained what appeared to be James's voice, speaking in a calm but urgent tone. What he said has never been fully deciphered, though audio experts who have studied the recording agree that it contains elements of at least 3 different languages, including what appears to be an ancient Native American dialect that has been extinct for over a century. The recording also contains unusual mechanical sounds that defy identification, and a rhythmic pattern that some have described as similar to the clicking sounds made by certain species of insects, though at a frequency and complexity far beyond any known insect communication. Margaret Callaway later provided additional context for these strange occurrences. She revealed that James had mentioned experiencing unusual phenomena during previous hunting trips in the Ozarks, including strange lights in the sky, unexplained sounds, and the feeling of being watched by something just beyond his field of vision. He had never reported these experiences to authorities, fearing that they might affect his hunting permits or reputation among fellow hunters. Margaret also mentioned that James had a particular interest in Native American legends of the Ozarks, including stories of mysterious beings said to inhabit the most remote areas of the forest. James Callaway's case remains one of the most perplexing in the history of the Missouri Ozarks. Officially, he is listed as missing, presumed dead, though no body has ever been recovered. The circumstances of his disappearance defy conventional explanation, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. His case joins dozens of similar disappearances in wilderness areas across the country. Cases that share common elements: experienced outdoors people vanishing without a trace, reports of unusual phenomena in the areas where they disappeared, and the discovery of physical evidence that defies rational explanation. The Mark Twain National Forest continues its ancient cycles, drawing hunters and outdoor enthusiasts who remain largely unaware of the mysteries it contains. James's story has become part of the modern folklore of the Ozarks, a cautionary tale told around campfires and in online forums dedicated to unexplained phenomena. Whether he became disoriented and succumbed to the elements, encountered foul play, or experienced something beyond our current understanding of reality remains unknown. What is certain is that something happened to James Callaway in those remote woods in November of 2020. Something that continues to haunt those who search for answers in the vast wilderness of the Ozarks. It was late July of 2021 when Dr. Eleanor Vance and her research team arrived at their remote field camp in the Brooks Range of northern Alaska. At 42 years old, Eleanor was a respected paleoclimatologist who had spent much of her career studying climate change through analysis of ice cores and permafrost samples. The current expedition, funded by the National Science Foundation, aimed to extract and analyze permafrost samples that had remained frozen for thousands of years, hoping to reconstruct climate patterns from the distant past. The team consisted of 6 researchers, all experienced in Arctic fieldwork, and they had established their camp approximately 100 miles from the nearest settlement, in an area accessible only by helicopter. The first 2 weeks of the expedition proceeded according to plan, with the team successfully extracting several core samples from depths ranging from 10 to 50 feet below the surface. The permafrost in this region was particularly well preserved, maintaining a consistent temperature well below freezing, even during the brief Arctic summer. The team worked methodically, documenting each sample with precise measurements and photographs before packing it for transport to a laboratory facility in Fairbanks. Eleanor maintained regular communication with the NSF project coordinator via satellite phone, providing detailed updates on their progress and any significant findings. The discovery that would change everything came on August 9th, as the team was extracting a core sample from an unusually deep borehole. At approximately 37 feet below the surface, the drilling equipment encountered what appeared to be an obstruction, something too hard to be penetrated by the standard coring bit. When the team carefully excavated around the obstruction, they discovered something that defied explanation. What appeared to be a metallic object, approximately 3 feet in length and shaped like a tapered cylinder, with a series of unusual markings etched into its surface. The object was embedded in what geologists estimated to be approximately 12,000-year-old permafrost, a depth that predated any known human presence in the region. Eleanor immediately recognized the significance of this discovery and contacted the NSF project coordinator to report their findings. The coordinator, after consulting with other officials, instructed the team to secure the object and await further instructions. A special team was dispatched from Fairbanks to examine the discovery, though challenging weather conditions would delay their arrival by several days. In the meantime, Eleanor and her team continued their work, though with a new focus on understanding the context of their unusual find. The first indication that something was amiss came on the evening of August 11th, when team member Dr. Marcus Chen reported hearing unusual sounds emanating from the area where the object was being stored in a specially constructed refrigerated container. Marcus described the sounds as a low-frequency hum, similar to what one might hear from electrical equipment, but with a rhythmic quality that seemed almost biological. Eleanor and other team members confirmed these sounds, though they were intermittent and could not be recorded by the audio equipment they had available. The team also noted that the temperature in the storage container had begun to fluctuate slightly, despite the refrigeration system functioning normally. The following day, as team members continued to monitor the object, they made another disturbing discovery. The markings on its surface appeared to be changing, though these changes were subtle and occurred over a period of hours rather than minutes. Dr. Rachel Kim, the team's geologist, documented these changes with a series of time-lapse photographs, revealing that the geometric patterns on the object's surface were slowly transforming into new configurations. The team also noted that the object seemed to be emitting a faint glow, visible only in complete darkness and described as a pale blue color that seemed to pulse in a regular rhythm. By the time the special team from Fairbanks arrived on August 14th, the situation had grown increasingly strange. The object had begun to emit a series of sounds that defied identification, not just the low-frequency hum reported earlier, but also higher-pitched tones that seemed to form patterns too complex to be random. The team had also discovered that the permafrost surrounding the excavation site was showing signs of unusual thawing, despite ambient temperatures remaining well below freezing. Most concerning, several team members reported experiencing headaches and disorientation when in close proximity to the object, symptoms that subsided when they moved away from the storage container. The team from Fairbanks, led by Dr. Samuel Reed, an expert in Arctic geology with experience in unusual discoveries, immediately established a secure perimeter around the storage container. They brought specialized equipment to monitor the object's emissions and to document any changes in its appearance or behavior. What they discovered over the next 48 hours would challenge everything they thought they knew about the history of human presence in North America and the nature of reality itself. The first breakthrough came when Dr. Reed's team successfully translated some of the markings on the object's surface. Using advanced imaging techniques and computer analysis, they determined that the markings represented a form of mathematical notation, one that incorporated concepts from geometry and physics that were not developed until the 20th century. Even more surprising, they found that some of the patterns corresponded to celestial alignments that would only be visible from Earth approximately 12,000 years in the past, the same period in which the object had been embedded in the permafrost. As the research continued, the object began to exhibit even more unusual properties. It started to emit electromagnetic fields that interfered with electronic equipment in the vicinity, creating static on radios and causing fluctuations in power systems. It also seemed to affect the behavior of wildlife in the area, with caribou and other animals avoiding the camp entirely, and birds changing their flight patterns to circumvent the airspace above the storage container. Most disturbingly, the team began to experience what could only be described as shared hallucinations, vivid images and sounds that seemed to be projected into their minds, often depicting scenes that appeared to be from Earth's distant past. The situation reached a critical point on August 18th, when the object suddenly became active. emitting a bright light and a series of complex tones that lasted for approximately 3 minutes. During this event, all electronic equipment in the camp ceased functioning, and several team members reported experiencing what they described as a download of information, complex concepts and images transmitted directly into their consciousness. When the event ended, the object had changed appearance, its surface now smooth and featureless, and it no longer emitted any sounds or electromagnetic fields. In the aftermath of this event, the NSF made the decision to evacuate the entire research team and transport the object to a secure facility for further study. The evacuation was conducted under conditions of extreme secrecy, with all team members required to sign non-disclosure agreements and debriefed extensively about their experiences. The object was transported in a specially designed container, and the research camp was dismantled completely, with all evidence of the excavation removed or destroyed. Dr. Eleanor Vance and her team have never spoken publicly about their discovery, though rumors have circulated in scientific circles about an extraordinary find in the Alaskan permafrost. What happened to the object after its removal from the site remains unknown, with official sources denying any knowledge of such an artifact. Some researchers who have studied similar phenomena suggest that the object might be what is sometimes referred to as an out-of-place artifact, an object that appears to be technologically advanced beyond what should be possible for the period in which it was created. The Brooks Range continues its ancient cycles, indifferent to the extraordinary discovery made within its vast expanse. The permafrost continues to hold secrets that may never be revealed, preserving evidence of events that challenge our understanding of history and reality. What Dr. Vance and her team discovered in that remote region of Alaska in the summer of 2021 represents one of the most perplexing scientific mysteries of our time. A reminder that there are still discoveries to be made that could fundamentally change our perception of the world and our place in it. The truth of what was found there, and what it means for our understanding of human history and the nature of reality, remains locked away in classified files, known only to a select few with the security clearance to access such information. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable. From the mist-shrouded mountains of Appalachia to the rugged coastlines of the Pacific Northwest, from the scorching deserts of the Southwest to the frozen tundra of the Arctic, our continent holds secrets that defy explanation. These 7 stories, each verified through official reports and witness testimony, represent only a fraction of the unexplained phenomena that occur each year in America's wilderness areas. They share common threads that suggest patterns beyond random chance experienced outdoors, people vanishing without a trace, strange arrangements of personal belongings, reports of unusual sounds and lights, and the discovery of physical evidence that challenges our understanding of the natural world. What connects these disparate experiences across different regions and time periods? Is there something inherent in certain wilderness areas that makes them prone to unusual phenomena? Or are we witnessing evidence of something that exists alongside our reality, occasionally intersecting with our world in ways that leave us confused and searching for answers? The stories we've explored tonight offer no definitive conclusions, only questions that linger long after the narratives end. They remind us that despite our technological advances and scientific understanding, there remain aspects of our world that resist categorization and explanation. The witnesses to these events, park rangers, forestry workers, hunters, researchers, and ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, share a common experience of encountering something beyond their comprehension. Their reports, documented in official records and retold in their own words, demonstrate a consistent pattern of phenomena that suggest intelligent agency rather than random chance. The precision with which personal belongings are arranged, the geometric patterns found in remote locations, and the unusual tracks that appear suddenly and disappear just as mysteriously all point toward something deliberate and purposeful, though its nature and intentions remain unclear. What becomes particularly unsettling when examining these cases collectively is the way they challenge our fundamental assumptions about the world we inhabit. We tend to think of reality as a fixed, predictable system governed by physical laws that we can observe and understand. Yet these experiences suggest that there may be aspects of reality that operate according to different principles, perhaps intersecting with our world only under specific conditions. The consistent reports of unusual sounds, electromagnetic interference, and perceptual anomalies in the areas where these disappearances occur hint at a reality that is more complex and multidimensional than our everyday experience suggests. The silence that follows these events is perhaps the most haunting element of all. In each case we've examined, there comes a point where communication ceases, where documentation ends, and where the trail grows cold. It is as if whatever is responsible for these phenomena operates in a realm beyond human perception, leaving us with only fragments of evidence and unanswered questions. The wilderness areas where these events occur share certain characteristics that might help explain why they serve as venues for such encounters. They are places of profound isolation, far from the distractions and technological infrastructure of modern civilization. They are ancient landscapes that have existed for millions of years, long before humans arrived and established our systems of understanding. They are places where the boundaries between different realities might naturally be thinner, where the veil between worlds grows more permeable. These are not merely physical locations, but liminal spaces where transformation becomes possible, where the ordinary rules of existence might temporarily be suspended. What responsibility do these stories place upon us as individuals and as a society? Do we dismiss them as anomalies, as statistical outliers in an otherwise predictable world? Or do we acknowledge them as evidence that our understanding of reality is incomplete, that there may be dimensions of existence that we have yet to recognize and study? The witnesses in these cases did not seek out extraordinary experiences. They were ordinary people going about their daily routines when they encountered something beyond their comprehension. Their willingness to share these experiences, despite the skepticism and sometimes ridicule they face, represents a form of courage that deserves our respect and attention. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. The documentation of these experiences serves not only to honor those who have lived through extraordinary encounters, but also to establish patterns that might eventually lead to greater understanding. Each account adds to the collective knowledge base, creating a more complete picture of the phenomena that occur in the wilderness areas of our country. Your stories, when shared responsibly and with attention to verifiable details, contribute to this ongoing investigation of the unexplained aspects of our world. The stories we've explored tonight remind us that the American landscape is not merely a collection of geographical features, but a repository of mysteries that have accumulated over thousands of years. These mysteries persist despite our efforts to categorize and explain them, challenging us to remain open to possibilities that extend beyond our current understanding. They invite us to approach the natural world with humility and respect, recognizing that there may be forces at work that are beyond our capacity to fully comprehend. As we conclude this episode of Snowbound Screams, we are left with more questions than answers. What lies beyond the boundaries of our everyday perception? What entities or forces might share our world without our awareness? These questions may never be fully answered, but the pursuit of those answers enriches our understanding of ourselves and the universe we inhabit. The stories of those who have encountered the unexplained serve as signposts pointing toward a reality that is more complex and mysterious than we often acknowledge. Thank you for watching Snowbound Screams. Until next time, stay safe out there.